Greetings, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'm Big Fella,
And I'm Credo.
and welcome to Pop Talks, where we take a slice out of the pop culture pie. Now, today we're going to do something a little special. We're going to introduce to you the variety of shows, cartoons, movies that made us who we are today, and our love for pop culture. And let me tell you, that's a big list, but we'll try to fit it in today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when it comes to me, actually, I'll go over actually the cartoons, the anime, the different types of media that have actually made us into what we are today, like where we get our values from and where we've derived a large source of entertainment.
Yeah. Would you want to go first, Credo?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'd say for Western cartoons, Regular Show to me was one of the best in that 2010s era. Like, easily a top shooter, and it's just the plot was mundane, but the best part about it was that it always opened avenues for the weird shit to creep out. Now, if you compare it to other shows, in my opinion, like The Amazing World of Gumball or Adventure Time, where the world is already crazy, it just builds upon it. So that's where I see the big difference. And Regular Show always just felt fresh. Like there's always like new characters, new storylines, and every time I think about this, is what I'd remain for in front of the TV, just to see that final episode and just to give it a proper farewell.
I agree, and I'm right there with Credo. I watched a Regular Show like when it was still coming out, and I watched it till the very end. And I gotta say, I did not expect a show that had, as Credo put, such a mundane and simplistic plot to have such like deep meanings, cool fight scenes, and have a variety of voice actors and even like famous actors in the show. Like I remember thinking, like, who was it that was in the show that was really famous? Well, for one thing, we know that D. Bradley Baker, who, as you all know, is the voice of almost every clone trooper in the Star Wars franchise in the animated series. He voiced numerous side characters, Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob, even Mark Hamill, the voice of the Joker, and the man behind Luke Skywalker himself was in the show since the very beginning as Skips, the big white gorilla who was the most badass of the bunch in my opinion. But yeah, that show was one of my personal favorites too. But I like growing up in the early 2000s because I was born in '01. I watched like that was the gem era of Saturday morning cartoons. I watched a variety of shows like American Dragon, Jake Long, Kim Possible, Lilo and Stitch, which remains one of my personal favorites to this day. And then, courtesy of my cousin, I ended up getting into anime. And the very first anime I ever watched was Mobile Suit Gundam Wing. And that basically led to a downward spiral of me getting into the anime subculture.
Actually, here's what I noticed between your interest and my interest is the fact that we both seem to enjoy plot-driven stories, and you got stuff like Adventure Time, like Generator Rex, Ben 10. Like for Adventure Time, the plot always unfolds, and the lore is just it keeps getting explored through the different events that occur. But I feel like in the other ones like Generator Rex and Ben 10, like as they continue to fight, that's when the plot starts to give out because the lore is explored further within like the powers rather than just the story.
Yes, and like for Generator Rex, it has like an overarching story of the nanites affecting everything worldwide.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then how, in the end, we start to learn more about these guys like Van Clyce and the backstories of all the characters. And I think it all really helps the lore come out. But the problem is that the show was unfinished at some point. It deserved a couple more seasons because there was a lot more to unfold.
Absolutely. That was sometimes it was common for back in the day. I mean, a lot of cartoons that I heard about like via listening to their intros on YouTube. A lot of shows that came out like in the early 90s or like the late 80s, early 90s, a lot of those shows only got like one season maximum. Like one particular show that I watched that like had long been done before I was born was called Mummies Alive, and that show it only ran for one season, but it was pretty good. Like I've watched a bunch of the episodes on YouTube, and the intro absolutely slaps. And the fact that like a show like that didn't get more attention, in my opinion, like the thing is with a lot of those shows, like the audience at the time doesn't appreciate them, but now that like a new generation is seeing it, it's more appreciated, but the fandom is practically dead or it's on its last legs.
And then that's where we end up getting stuff like cult fandoms or cult followings, because it's always the fans that will probably step in to do something that the original creators were unable to do. Even like when I look at some video games like Skyrim, for example. Now, of course, there's not much Bethesda can do that can satisfy everybody, but at the same time, the fan base, they create all the mods, they get like the different textures, and yeah, when you have a fan base like that and a fan base that dedicated, then there could be a push for something else. Even for example, Bleach, which is going to be our last point, that the fact that it just kept a steady fan base even 10 years before it got its last season, just goes to prove, like, even the voice actor once signed a petition to get Bleach back on air.
That definitely shows a lot of how much like these shows matter to the voice actors, because I've heard various instances of actors, even Ron Perlman, who played Hellboy in the Guillermo del Toro movies, when the third film was stuck in development hell before being ultimately canceled, Ron Perlman was up for returning as Hellboy again. He even was dressed up as Hellboy and visited a cancer patient who wanted to meet him. And the fact that like he went through all that trouble to dress up as the character and probably took like hours of makeup application, that's dedication. And that shows that these cartoons, these anime mean something to people. And that definitely goes to show like that they care about the fans, they care about like the experience of being on the show. Cuz like for instance, Generator Rex was a great show that I liked, and I've actually met the voice actress of Doc Holliday, Gray Delisle, and like she speaks very highly of the show even to this day. And that is what I love about meeting voice actors. When you tell them about a role that you've heard them in, and I've heard a lot of roles from like different voice actors, and I've met quite a few of them in my time. And when I tell them, like whenever I tell them about these shows, I kid you not, a lot of their faces light up, and they're just like so happy to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to like the dedication and the love that these actors have for their work, because sometimes people would look at their best work versus something else like Generator X. If they look at Oslo for Great Alive and then just look at Dr. Holiday, they're going to be like, oh wait, that's way too big of a step up and all that, and we're not going to care about it. So that's why they love to hear it when people come up to them and say like, hey, I thought your role specifically as Dr. Holiday was one of my favorite, because if she doesn't get to hear that very often, she'll start to attach more negative connotations to the show, and then it'll get pissed more and more the people ask about it.
Yeah. And like in recent years, a lot of shows that have been gone for like almost 2 decades like made a resurgence. I mean, I think I'm picking like an older example here, but one show that Credo and I did both grow up watching was Samurai Jack. That show was awesome. Like for the time as a kid, seeing a samurai go up against giant robots, mutant monsters, and the literal embodiment of evil himself, Aku, that was awesome. And the way it ended, like for those of you who are unfamiliar with the original ending, Jack met a little baby and reunited him with his family, and that was how it ended. That was how it ended at the time. And when I read about that, I'm like, that's a bit of a cop out, don't you think? But the one thing that was awesome about Samurai Jack is that many years later, I think the show ended in 2005, if I'm not mistaken, but it came back like over a decade later, and Genndy Tartakovsky returned and as creator and designer of the characters for one final season, and it was spectacular. And I don't usually think that like sequels like to series that like ended 10, 15 years ago or even 30 years ago like deserves much place, because this is a hot take for me. Like, I mean, I love it that like fandoms that are already established will put out more work. But sometimes you have to give a chance for other like new stories to develop, like new stories to be fleshed out, to grow their own fandoms. And yes, some people say, well, if there's already fandom, they're going to invest the money in that. And that's fine. But sometimes you just got to start with something new, because you can't watch the same show or the same universe of a show every time. You got to branch out a little bit.
Yeah, and that's actually why I've began to start appreciating more multiverse genres that are coming out these days, because every single universe and every single different in every single different piece of lore, it always has something unique to it. And once you start to go through the world building, that's the most to me personally, that's the most important thing when it comes to a show is the world building, because to really be attached to a show, you really start to look into a lot of its specifics, like its history, like the power system, and just generally the characters, the backstories. Once you start to look into all that, that's where the attachment really starts to grow.
Yeah. And now to take a side note to the world of anime, as I said, I got into anime via Mobile Suit Gundam Wing. That series was awesome because it makes two of my favorite things that I also watched from Power Rangers. Awesome robot fights and badass fights between the humans, because you can't always just see a giant robot fight. And you got to see the human side a little bit too. And I mean, yes, they were teenagers, and at the time, I'm like, I wonder what it's like to be like the Power Rangers. And let me tell you, being a teenager is nothing like how it looked in the shows. I mean, TV is not realistic. Depending on the genre, it's not realistic of the lifestyle of teenagers. But yeah, Mobile Suit Gundam Wing was an excellent mecha series, which we will talk about further in the show when we will probably dedicate an episode to the Gundam franchise in general. But Mobile Suit Gundam Wing got me into anime courtesy of my cousin, and I ended up watching various other series at the time. Samurai Champloo, which is great, by the way. Cowboy Bebop, another absolute banger, and I will defend it to this day. Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which is a fantastic series. I'm probably gonna be saying that a lot, but these are good shows. A lot of people grew up on this stuff. And another one that was the very thing that introduced me to shonen, the genre of shonen, was Dragon Ball Z, and that is a good one. And it's just crazy how it's been going on long before I was even born. It's been going before I was born, and it's still going on to this day.
And actually, I'm glad you mentioned shows like Mobile Suit Gundam and Dragon Ball Z, because you're thinking about the legacy that these two shows have left for the whole genre. Because for shonen, Goku is the archetype, and everybody likes not to really copy, but at least take some bits of inspiration for their MCs. And for Mobile Suit Gundam, Mecha was just looked at as something for losers. Nobody gave a shit about Mecha. But after Mobile Suit Gundam, you started to get stuff like Evangelion, Gurren Lagann, Code Geass, some of that 90s to early 2010s anime, because that's the kind of impact that it leaves on its viewers and for the fan bases altogether.
Yes. And the best part is, for Mobile Suit Gundam Wing, Cowboy Bebop, and all the anime that Credo and I have just mentioned, is that a lot of them still hold up today. A lot of them compared to some of the more modern shonen series like Black Clover or Boruto. We don't talk about Boruto here. Yeah, they actually, a lot of these modern shows don't hold a candle to some of the earlier Gundam series. Now, I'm not saying that the Gundam series are bad, that any of them are bad. It's just that some are superior to others. For instance, I'm not saying I hated Witch from Mercury, but personally, I like Gundam Wing better, because I guess I liked the characters, I liked the fights between the Gundams a little bit more, and the whole overarching story. But yes, Dragon Ball, how Credo was saying, Goku is the archetype of shonen protagonists. And for instance, that spawned the meme. If you see a powerful character in fiction, you ask, can he beat Goku? And the answer is probably no, because if you're looking at it, look at all the characters that Goku's defeated in his universe. He's defeated literal gods, and that's a very, very, very hard thing to do, I'd imagine.
No, actually, okay, now that we're getting into the death battle aspect, I've got to say Goku is, I'm going to ignite a debate, but Goku is not the strongest even in his own verse. Alright? But nonetheless, that does not mean he's weak. Alright, now Goku still claps 90% of fucking fiction. Because you can scale him to universal, multi-universal, even though we could leave Goku scaling for another episode, but I'm just putting that out there. that he's still capable of like competing with gods and like supernatural beings and like people and like whole fucking aliens that just spawn out of everywhere. Each one of them got their own powers, and they're just like overpowered.
Yes, and that term is applied a lot to fictional characters. I mean, to go back on one show that I watched as a kid, Lilo and Stitch. I never really paid much attention to like what made Stitch Stitch, but now that I'm older and more aware of the lore of what Jumba Jukiba did to make Stitch, I just find it incredible how like a little furball could be so destructive because Lilo and Stitch, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you are, but for those of you who aren't, Lilo and Stitch was originally a movie from Disney that got made into a full length series on Disney. And I watched the whole show. I watched the accompanying movies that came with it. They were all awesome. And there is actually a live action Lilo and Stitch in the works. I've actually heard about it. I've seen a few screenshots from like the set of what Stitch is set to look like. And of course, there's the teaser trailer now on YouTube. It actually looks like it has the potential to be a good Disney live action remake, and I will watch it when it comes out.
And then again, when we start thinking about remakes, the fact that you just mentioned remakes to me immediately got my mind towards the anime stuff. Because even though you may like the Disney and all the other stuff, I just don't think about it that often. But when I think about something that you just said related to anime, that was the crazy part. You just with remakes, for example, when you make like a Death Note remake, that's not the thing. They remade it into a live action. Okay, that was heresy. That was complete bullshit. This should have never happened, and I'm glad nobody likes it.
Yes, because the issue is like for live action remakes, like you can't like that's a lot of source material to cover in like a single hour and a half long movie. Like Death Note, I don't even know how long the manga was, but wasn't the anime like 24 episodes?
Death Note, no, it was like around that, maybe even pushing up to like 30 something.
Okay, yeah. That's like 24 half-hour long episodes, and you'd basically be taking the entire story and smushing it into one movie. And there's a big issue when it comes to live action remakes of anime done by American studios. Like, no offense, that there will be instances of like miscasting, even like basically mixing up the character archetypes. And even if like the actor like tries his best to act the character, you can't compete with the OG voice actors. Like those guys, they did the character so well, and you can't really top that.
That's what we talk about when we say stuff like you can't really copy someone else's talent because the way you want to approach a character is a way nobody else has seen before. But at the same time, the fact that this image of the old voice actors glued in their head, all the lines, every single iconic moment, that's where I say, it's hard to top that. Even then, with the bigger problem I'd say with the live action remakes is the fact that there's just not much effort put into it. It's very, very low effort. It's very bare bones. It just doesn't want to go into the story. It's just used as a quick marketing ploy, but it's never ever going to get close to what the original has because that was not their intention.
Yes, and as I mentioned, I grew up in the early 2000s, and that was like I grew up watching Disney movies. I grew up watching Disney shows and Jet X when that was still around. God, that brings back memories. But yeah, like so many of the shows, like Kim Possible, Lilo and Stitch, I think American Dragon, Jake Long, if I'm not mistaken. A lot of those shows, they like need to be untouched because like they made a direct to TV Kim Possible live action movie, and the less said about that the better. But I have like watched a few Disney live action remakes that have actually been pretty good. For instance, Beauty and the Beast, that's probably my favorite Disney live action remake. I mean, you still can't compare to the original Beauty and the Beast, but the new one was really good. I liked the music, I liked the casting, and the performances were pretty spot on actually.
So right now I've kind of want to change the topic a little bit actually to the video games. Alright, I feel like video games were a very integral part of my childhood. I'm sure they were for yours. So I just really want to hear your thoughts on like which video game genres were just it for you.
Okay. Well, as a kid growing up, I didn't have like a lot of gaming stations. I mean, the first one I had was the Nintendo 3DS and then the Nintendo Wii. The games that I played on those were mostly like action adventure Mario games. Um, that was about it. But I also played a lot of video games with my cousin. I remember the first T for Teen game that I played with my cousin was Uncharted, the very first Uncharted game, and I just remember having such a blast shooting the bad guys. Excuse me, looking for puzzles, doing all that stuff in the game. I mean, it was a lot of fun. Probably not appropriate for a 6-year-old because I was 6 when Uncharted came out, but hey, like there were some of my friends that were playing GTA when they were still in grade school. So
Yeah, no, actually, for me, it would be the fact that I got into RPGs as a kid because to me, I grew up on MMORPGs, I grew up on JRPGs, and even platformers. Like for me, Sonic was just the best game that was out at the time because even though it had competitor Mario, which already had a lot of spin-offs, but I feel like as a platformer, Sonic does a way better job because it's the level design is a lot more intricate and it even gets a lot more advanced later on. So I feel like that was a pretty big part of why I like fast-paced platformers. And for the RPGs, I used to play this game called Champions of Norath. Now that one was just like it never got to me. Why it never got like a PS3 release, a PC release, even a PS4 release. Never got any of those. Didn't get any of that good treatment that other games, sorry, seem to get. Because even then, like for Mass Effect, they tried to revive the series again, and then they gave us something horrible. So usually I hate it whenever they want to bring back something, but they also want to put a sequel and just milk it for more money. That's something I like completely disagree with.
yeah, and that's totally fair. Because like a lot of the video games that I later grew up with, like I got into COD, I got into the Batman Arkham series, um, and I did play a few JRPGs with my cousin. I don't enjoy them as much as Credo does. I mean, certain aspects of them I do, but I guess when it comes to like these JRPGs, if there's been like an anime or a TV show of some kind associated with it, that gets me into the fandom. Because when you're playing like a JRPG, like for instance, you're playing Octopath Traveler, Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy, Xenoblade, you're basically playing an anime almost, except you're controlling the character, you're fighting the bad guys, all that jazz. And for some of those instances, you're even trying to romance a particular character, but that other than like a special cutscene at the end of the game that has no bearing on the entirety of the plot.
Yeah, actually, what I say the problem, what kind of deters people from JRPGs would be the grinding aspect. Like sometimes you can't even get through the game unless you've like looked for all the secrets. For example, when I played Judgment, which is a spin-off of the Yakuza series, it wasn't as direct in how to unlock certain things. Like for example, the double roll, I had to unlock it by looking for it with a drone in an episode. And I'm like, how is that ever going to come across me? Like, yeah, maybe somebody's exploring with a drone, but at the same time, I still have my eyes focused on like defeating the bad guy. Like this extra stuff that's going on right now. I mean, it's fun, but it's not what I came for.
Yeah, yeah, that's totally fair. And like nowadays, I a lot of the games that I play include like shooters like COD, Red Dead Redemption, Doom, which we'll definitely cover a lot of those in these episodes. But I still have the love of adventure games. Like I love the sense where you're a sole character or a group of characters and you go to distant faraway lands, you see the landscape, you see the creatures, the flora, the fauna, and you even have to fight certain bad guys that threaten to destroy it. I love that aspect. Like you're literally going out into the world, which I wish a lot of people could do, but unfortunately doing so requires money and we do not have a lot of that.
Now that actually brings me back to like my dreams of LARPing, because when you start thinking about things like LARPing, you start to like video games like Baldur's Gate or anything that's D&D related, anything RPG related. You would go into LARPing, even though it's something that we don't do very often or haven't done at all. But it's something that still interests us because just having that whole weekend to yourself to just be who you want to be is the greatest part of that. That's why I say like why people should get into RPGs a little more is because there is a community around it, and to be honest, it could get even better than the actual game.
Yes, and as I was saying, like when I've met voice actors, when I go to these conventions, I meet various people in the lines because I will tell you this: when you go to a convention, if you haven't, let me just warn you, you will have to wait in line. You'll have to wait in line to get an autograph, to get a photo op, any of that stuff. But I will tell you, the wait doesn't like drag on that much if you find common ground to talk with people. Because I've talked with people about like the etymology of their cosplay, their favorite TV show of the person we're meeting, their favorite role. Like what were some of the shows and cartoons they grew up with? Like even nowadays, even though like I'm 20 something years old, I'm still in college. I love to watch reruns of The Amazing World of Gumball, of Regular Show, Adventure Time, Craig of the Creek, all those shows on Cartoon Network. And to tell you the truth, I'm a little jealous of the kids that get to grow up on this stuff now because back in the day, a lot of these shows they weren't even thought of yet. I mean, yeah, Credo and I saw Regular Show when we were still in grade school, but for instance, like Craig of the Creek, that came out like 4 or 5 years ago. So yeah, that one, Amazing World of Gumball. Well, I saw that. I started watching that when I was 10, and that's another show that really shaped like my love of animation, particularly the fact that this show blends all manner of animation. Like we've got claymation, puppets, 3D, CGI, all that, and they mix it into one show, and it's amazing. It's crazy, but somehow it works.
Actually, I'd like to backtrack to some of the earlier cartoons. I'm talking early 2000s purely, like Fastest Home for Imaginary Friends, My Gym Partner's a Monkey. There's like those kind of shows like Flapjack even, which kind of built the foundation towards the 2010 shows because Flapjack was just hugely influential in its own right. And with those kind of things, even Billy and Manny, I forgot to mention that because all those really started to set up the whole genre of just slapstick and wacky humor, but at the same time remaining serious and also relatable. That's a big part because a lot of people find characters in these shows very relatable, and they just like base their mood around them. Like some people who are sarcastic want to be like Mandy, or people who kind of see themselves as like hyperactive would also see themselves as Blue from
Foster's.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I see is the like the intersection of everybody's interest when it comes to these early 2000 shows because they just each had their own charm and they couldn't really be replicated.
Absolutely. And as I said, in the early 2000s to the 2010s, those were the peak years of Saturday morning cartoons. Because, like Credo said, we had Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends, My Gym Partner's a Monkey, Flapjack, Samurai Jack, all these shows that were on Cartoon Network. And let's not also forget Nickelodeon. Nickelodeon had some good shows too, but personally, I'm a bit more impartial to Cartoon Network myself.
Yeah, and when you sort of think about like a lot of those early 2000 shows, there are those lost shows that you watched like an episode or two of as a kid, but it somehow stuck with you. And then as an adult, you try to find the name of it, and you like Google all over the place, and even post it on Reddit, like, what was this cartoon's name? And sometimes when you actually do end up getting to see that cartoon, you're like, wow, this is really a hidden gem. Like, why didn't more people watch this? I don't know. For me, if I were to name like one lost cartoon, well, it's not really lost, but it was just not as popular at its time. It was way ahead of its time. Was Invader Zim.
Oh yeah, that was a good one. I mean, they did come out with that movie that didn't that serve as like the series finale.
I mean, it did, but like the way it was treated during its development was where I think everything went wrong, because like the plot that it had set up and the way the characters were developed and the way that everyone was portrayed, it deserved a lot more recognition than a lot of other shows that were out at the time. But it was just whatever doesn't really. It's all just based on ratings. That's the thing. Back in the day, it was all ratings. Like that's the only thing that they would keep up on the show if it just got the appropriate ratings. Maybe if you only see one or two, it's just because the show just doesn't. The network, I mean, just doesn't want to push it that much.
And what Creo was saying when it comes to ratings, one show that was originally canceled despite, for all reasons, toy sales, was Young Justice. That's a show that I absolutely fell in love with because as someone who grew up reading like the early 2000s comics of the Justice League, of Batman, Superman, the Flash, a variety of characters in DC, seeing a new generation like of the sidekicks of the Justice League forming their own team and working together, that was awesome. I enjoyed like every episode of that show. And the way it ended in Young Justice Invasion, which was the second season at the time, the way it ended was very, very bittersweet and left a whole lot of stories that were left to be told. And the whole reason why the show wasn't renewed is because the toy sales weren't keeping up with what Warner Brothers was expecting, and unfortunately, the show got axed. This led to a years-long fan movement where the show finally got renewed and went on for 2 more seasons, or 3 if I'm not mistaken. And I don't know if there's a new season in the works, but I think there should be because, like I said, there's a lot of ground to cover because these are the sidekicks of heroes that have been around since the 1940s. Like Superman, Batman, a lot of these characters, there's a lot of ground to cover with a lot of these characters. But one show that I think is still underappreciated, and if I believe that the fandom is still trying to get it revived, is Megas XLR. Are you familiar with that one, Credo?
No.
So Megas XLR was a show that came out on Cartoon Network in 2005. Yeah, a lot of the shows that I'm familiar with came out in 05 or 04. Long story short, humanity is basically at war with these like tentacle-faced aliens, and they send humanity sends a soldier back in time with this big-ass robot to protect the Earth from these aliens. Unfortunately, it lands in Jersey City and winds up in the hands of this fat mechanic named Coob. His best friend, I think his name's Jamie, I could be wrong, but long story short, these three, the soldier, Coob, and his best friend, they become Earth's unlikely protectors and basically go up against all manner of wacky threats. It had everything you could have wanted in an early 2000s cartoon. It had kick-ass action, like a really badass theme song, and the characters, I mean, sometimes they weren't fully developed, but they were developed enough that you're like, you know what? They're pretty cool. And the show, it ended only after 2 seasons, which is a crime because it was great. It should have gone on for at least another season or 2. But the fandom, excuse me, the fandom still has hopes that eventually it will be revived, and I'm keeping my fingers crossed because that's a show I would like to see more of.
Yeah, and just to conclude everything, we've already covered a lot of ground on like what really made us who we are today, like what shows we watched and what media we consumed. Because, when I started to backtrack and think about a lot of the other things that have shaped me, I started to get like nostalgic, and of course this nostalgia has also brought me to come up here and like share my opinion on the matter, his opinion as well. So of course, until next time, we've always got a lot more ground to cover, and we got a lot more stories to tell.
Absolutely. This concludes our episode for today. If you like what you see, leave a comment, a like, subscribe if you want to, and share us with your friends because there's a whole lot of stories that people can tell us. Once again, I'm Big Fella.
I'm Credo.
And we'll see you next time. Peace out.